Hello and welcome everybody to this week's DevCentral Connects. My name is Boo, one of your community evangelists on the DevCentral team, and I am your host today. We're going to be talking to Michael Mattsson in just a moment here. He is from HP. He's one of the technical marketing engineers focusing on storage, specifically for Kubernetes, actually. And he's got a really cool background with Kubernetes as far as storage integrations, the CSI driver. So that's pretty cool. He's got a lot of experience and he's going to take us through some of that. But before we go through any of that, I just wanted to mention that DevCentral is supported by community.f5.com. If you haven't checked out our forums yet, you'll want to head over to that website, sign up, totally free. You can ask questions about anything on there. We can answer your F5 questions on there, but you can ask questions, just general technology questions on there as well. Great way to interact with technical peers on there. And you can interact with us, the DevCentral Connects hosts, or your community evangelists. This show specifically has a thread on there. So if you head over to the groups on DevCentral Connects, or the groups on community.f5.com, you will see a group called DevCentral Connects. And inside of there, you just have to click join once you're logged in. And once you've joined the group, you'll actually see all the show threads. So all the information that we talk about within the shows, we'll actually post all of that info on a thread. One other thing that I will highlight on community.f5.com is the events as well. And one that I will highlight is one called the 2023 Public Sector Symposium. This is a hybrid event, so it's live and virtual as well. And this is happening in McLean, Virginia at the Ritz-Carlton in Tyson's Corner, March 21st, 22nd, 23rd. We got keynotes from our CEO, Francois Lecault-Deneau, Kara Sprague, who is our Chief Product Officer as well, and a number of other folks will be there giving out training events. You can actually claim CPEs if you're an ISC Square type of person. You have a CISSP and you need to collect your CPEs. Head on over to that event to collect some, or join the virtual event as well. We'd love to host you on there. One other event that's happening, and I'm going to bring on Jason to talk about it, is NGINX's Microservices March. And we had a great time with this last year. We went through the labs and whatnot. And so we are participating again this year. And so I'll bring on Jason here. Jason, how you doing?
I'm doing quite well. It's a Tuesday following our F5 Wellness Weekend. F5 has been taking very good care of us these last couple of years since COVID kicked off, and we get a nice long Friday through Monday off. So it's like, an expanded weekend. We don't have to take vacation for it. And so it's Monday for us, even though it's Tuesday, but it's a fantastic wellness weekend. And yeah, Microservices Month is kicking off tomorrow. So you'll have access to the webinar. There's 4 units during this month, and they'll have the webinars and follow-up conversations, and then we'll have labs. And so I'm going to do the lab, and I'm just going to do that live every Thursday. I think 11 a.m. Pacific is the time. I'll get the show published today. So yeah, join me as I walk through that lab. It'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, fantastic. So if folks head over to nginx.com/mm, they've got a little shortener on there. You can sign up for the labs on there, and then you can basically join you, Jason, like live, like side by side, basically punching through the lab together.
That's right. We can do it together, and you can join this dum-dum as we work through all the microservices architectures and do it from scratch, and it'll be a lot of good time. It'll be a good time.
Yeah, those are super fun. I learned a lot doing it last year, just the way that they structure the labs. And even though I've gone through some of that stuff through some training that we've had before, different perspectives, is written by different folks. The training platform is really cool, interactive. You don't have to worry about running it yourself. Although one of our MVPs, Daniel Wolf, last year took it upon himself to actually turn it into a lab that you can run locally on your own machine as well. So that was pretty cool to see. Our MVPs are always up to pretty fun little projects.
Yep.
So otherwise, I just wanted to talk about some other news, Jason. Big news last week. You passed your Certified Kubernetes Administrator exam, which is no joke of an exam, right?
I did, yeah. It's a 2-hour practical. So in the fall, I did the Security Plus and passed that one. But that's all like knowledge. You're learning things. And then you're answering multiple choice or multiple answer questions. This is practical. You have
Mm.
access to the documentation in the test. It's can you build stuff in the 2 hour, or build and troubleshoot and fix things in the 2 hours that you have. So, time is really the critical thing in a practical exam. So you really have to spend you got to do the work ahead of time
Mm.
to really learn. I followed. First of all, thank you to Michael O'Leary and Tony Marfil and our study group that we went through this, January and February. We met twice a week and just encouraged each other, challenged each other, did some mock exams together. But really, Michael O'Leary just has a heart for people to be able to set aside the time to do these things. And I was in a study group with Tony last year, and just with trying to get out of my old house, I didn't have the extra time to study, so I had to bail last year. But then this year, Michael in December was like, "Hey, putting a study group together. I know you didn't get a chance to finish last year. What do you think?" And yeah, so committed to it, did the work, and I wasn't sure I was going to pass. So I didn't go into the test with a lot of confidence, but uh, certainly the Udemy course that we signed up and did was tremendous, and did that with the Code Cloud access
Mm.
to labs that you get through the Udemy course. All of that gives you all the practical that you need to pass the exam, or at least it gave me all the things I needed to do to pass the exam. And Kubernetes is no joke.
Mm.
There's a lot of pieces. There there is a lot of pieces to the Kubernetes ecosystem, and the CKA just barely touches the surface. So I'm curious, when we get to talk to our guest here in a few minutes, the difference between what you learn in a course that has to test core knowledge, because they don't test third-party integrations, which is kind of a big deal in the Kubernetes
Mm.
ecosystem. So, how the book knowledge of passing a core exam translates into the real world. So I'm
Mhm.
curious to talk about that regarding storage.
Yeah, well, kudos to you, Jason. For folks who have not, who aren't familiar with the CKA, most people don't pass. I shouldn't say most. I don't know what the exact number is, but most people don't pass on the first try. And you did, Jason. So that's enormous as a feat. And I know you're always busy with so many things, family, and all the stuff we have going on at work. So that is a huge accomplishment.
Thank you.
Um,
Appreciate that.
and a couple folks who want to chime in as well. First of all, Jose, hi to you. And
Hi, Jose.
Jose gives his kudos here. And also Mr. Tony Hines also throwing out
Hey, the
that
boss
congrats as
man,
well.
our fearless leader. I should. He hates it when I call him that, and so I should run my little script that gives me alternatives, uh, and I'll come back later in the show and call him something else. But thank you, Trust.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Awesome. And a kudos from
And
Leslie as
Leslie,
well.
appreciate it.
Fantastic. Um, one one other thing that I'll mention. So what I'm doing right now for folks who are listening to this is I'm pulling up the chat that's coming up off of the YouTube viewers right now. So you might be listening to this because you found our podcast. And if you haven't found our podcast yet and you're watching this right now, our podcast is available on Apple, Google, and Spotify podcasts. So you can head over there, subscribe, leave a 5-star review. Helps us out a ton as far as the algorithmic magic that puts us up in the rankings. And then otherwise, if you're watching this right now or you're watching this later on, you might be watching this from YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Make sure you're giving us a follow, subscribe, hit like, leave comments, interact with us live if possible as well. That all being said, without further ado, I know we're going over a little bit here, so I want to bring on Michael right now. Michael, how you doing?
I'm good, Boo. Thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, great to have you on. We'll get straight to it. Would love to get from you a little bit of an introduction on yourself. We've introduced you as our Kubernetes storage expert for the day.
Yeah.
And maybe we can find out a little bit more about you, though.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm a tech marketing engineer with Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and a tech marketing engineer does a little bit of everything. I feel sometimes like I'm the janitor on the team that well, I interact with product management and the engineers and QA in the field, and I do a lot of training. I see myself as an educator today because within storage,
Mm.
a lot of the it's very much about the speeds and feeds of appliance X versus appliance Y, right? And I'm more up in the application layer of things, right? So I'm trying to have our field have a better understanding of what we're trying to face here, where we go really deep into what customers are actually doing in the application layer, right? So I became so I went from being a speeds and feeds tech marketing engineer to working with containers. So I was deeply immersed in Docker and Docker volume plugins and stuff when that kind of was hot back in 2015, I think. And then we all of a sudden we started orchestrating containers, and all of a sudden storage became a really big problem. And you really need to have really clever integrations to have your storage appliance. I worked at Nimble Storage at that time, actually, and we did a ton of work to have enterprise grade storage presented to containers, right? So that's kind of my background, and that's what I've been doing ever since, right? So there's been an evolution from that we're going to talk a little bit about today, and to where we are from that time span of where we just had in-tree drivers versus where we are today with the container storage interface. So.
No, fantastic. Yeah, this is a great background to be able to talk through this then. And as we go along, I'll let Jason pepper all the questions since he's the CKA and he's up here as far as level of Kubernetes knowledge. I'm just down here. For folks who aren't listening or who are just listening right now, I'm showing how high Jason is on the totem pole compared to me.
Well,
so maybe
on that front, Ken Salkow, who is the guy who runs the certification program for F5. He has the minimum, qualified candidate or whatever that is. That's me at the CKA level, right? I'm no expert by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just getting my feet wet in the Kubernetes world. So, let's lower the bar for Jason just a little bit.
Well,
I do have a question before we get into Kubernetes real quick. When you talk about enterprise class storage, what does that mean? What does that mean? Besides, just like connecting up, a disk, an external disk sitting on my desk. Where's the bar for enterprise storage?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, there's many factors that kind of defines an enterprise storage array, right? So you have the resilience, you have the HA component, you have all the data management capabilities, snapshot clones and replication and such, right? And data reduction technologies such as compression and deduplication and such. And very popular these days is that you have some sort of cloud integration where you can manage fleets of these across your enterprise as well. So there's a management aspect of it as well that where I would kind of categorize the storage appliance as enterprise ready, is that you must have some sort of control and governance points to manage the devices as well, right? But at the end of the day, it's just a couple of smart controllers that basically manages a bunch of this in the most efficient and most performant way there is, I'd say, right? And traditionally, you run the stateful types of apps that we've seen in the past. It's so that you use it for a backing store for VMware, you use it for SQL Server, Oracle, and all these kind of big brand databases, right? And that requires the shared storage aspect of it, right? So these storage appliances, you put them on a network, you put them on a SAN with connectivity, fiber channel over Ethernet, or NVMe or Fabric, whatnot, right? And you need to have multiple hosts connecting to these devices to aggregate performance, availability, and sometimes you also kind of cobble them together to stretch the capacity of multiple appliances into one big namespace, right? So I talked about a lot of multiple different characteristics here, but there's a ton of bells and whistles these devices come with. And
cool.
When it comes to Kubernetes, it's just like, to me, it's just like, how can we abstract this functionality up to the Kubernetes user, right? So that is kind of my take on like, why is enterprise storage even relevant? It's just because we have all these like very relevant features that should be abstracted all the way up to the end user. But I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself here a little bit, right? But that's kind of the tie into why would you even run Kubernetes with one of these in the first place?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were talking before about, where we could take the conversation, and we were thinking of just starting with the base level of 101. You've been there from the early days of Kubernetes, so maybe you can tell us about what things were like back then, and maybe a bit of how things progressed.
Yeah, absolutely. So what happened kind of in the early days of Kubernetes, we all know it's an open source project and all that, and it's one of the biggest open source project on GitHub ever hosted, right? And in the early days, I'm talking early days like 1.1, 1.2, right? All these like cloud storage drivers and some vendors' storage drivers actually made it all the way into the source core project of Kubernetes, and that became very quickly that became completely unsustainable because all of a sudden every vendor on the planet needed to collaborate with the core Kubernetes project. And one of the first projects to kind of try to take that out of the source tree was something called the Flex Volume plugin. And the Flex Volume plugin, I kind of call it like a mid-air band-aid, right? Kind of we kind of build it as we fly it kind of thing. It was a very primitive interface. It was very cumbersome to write drivers for it because the customer basically required to install a binary on every single node that required to attach storage. So that was like a security hazard and whatnot. And a lot of vendors jumped on that train, including HP and Nimble. We actually took our Docker Volume plugin, and it's just like, all right, let's strip off the Docker parts and just run the parts that we need as a Flex Volume driver. And we kind of got access to a lot of the functionality we built in the Docker Volume plugin into the Flex Volume driver. I don't know exactly the timing. I would say it was like 2017, 2018 or so. There was a consortium of different companies that started to collaborate on the container storage interface. And I think Google was one of the main drivers there. And the container storage interface is more of it's a specification essentially, right? And they also formed a group within the CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, called SIG Storage. So there's multiple companies collaborating there on the specification to make sure that everyone's needs are met as we evolve this specification. And the container storage interface allows vendors to basically build CSI drivers completely independently outside of the core Kubernetes project. We don't need to contribute code up to the core project. We host our own drivers on GitHub. It's our own project. We have our own we have our own life cycle essentially, right? And we can have our own release cadence and all that. We do need to kind of verify and test against new versions of Kubernetes that comes out if there's any change in the specification that needs to be catered to. But I'd say the CSI specification is very stable at this point, right? So there are rarely any changes. There's only additions. There's new functionality coming out at a steady pace, right? So you kind of want to do some maintenance on your driver to add some new functionality and such, right? So that's kind of the evolution of the storage driver component of it, right? But if we kind of go in and talk a little bit more about the practicality of storage in Kubernetes, is that we all know that a container in itself is ephemeral, right? There is no state stored anyway, and a lot of developers find a lot of comfort in that they know that when I start this container, I know exactly how it will run on my laptop in the Kubernetes cluster and in the public cloud and such, right? So, and that's kind of where things started, where you took a piece of storage where the node from the node where the application was running, essentially, right? And that's where we have the empty dir, then the host path plugins and such, right? So it's very much about the node abstraction of that happens in Kubernetes that kind of gets abstracted to the application. But it's you have many specifically like enterprise applications like databases and such, right? They need stateful. I mean, they need persistent storage, right? And they might need persistent storage that moves wherever the application is scheduled, and that means that when the application starts up the first time, it starts on node A, and you might need to do some maintenance on node A, and then you need to move the application to node B in your cluster, and that process of dismantling the volume of one node and attaching it to another, that is a very vendor-specific thing, how you do, right? So if you go to HP and you see how we do it, and it's just then you go to one of our competitors and see how they do it, and then it will all be different, right? And many applications that run on Kubernetes, they have needs for different access modes, as it's called, right? If we go into the details there. So you have like the read-write ones, where you have one pod accessing one persistent volume claim at any given time. And then you have read write many, where you have multiple pods across multiple nodes accessing the same persistent volume claim, as it's called in Kubernetes. I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. But and that kind of sets the stage of what actually you need to look for in your backend storage system when you cannot choosing storage, right? So you always have to look at the needs of the application that you're running, right? And if it's an in-house, or if it's something you've taken off some other CNCF project that you're installing with an operator or a Helm chart, there's usually descriptions in the Helm chart that asks for certain persistence criteria. So that's kind of how you learn how the application is actually accessing storage, so to speak. But from an yeah, you got a question there, Jason?
Real quick. You mentioned how node, like you might have to move your volumes from node to node if you're moving your workloads. I was just curious, like I've been out of the storage game since 2004. So I would say, however storage is done in the modern ways, I'm real shady on the details. But when you're mounting to your storage, and you do know that your nodes are going to move around, is it possible to mount your volumes on all the nodes so that as the workloads move, you don't have to worry about that? Or are there some technical challenges to doing that? Almost kind of like a load balanced environment where, your volumes are available on every node, and regardless of where you go, they just attach to it and you're good to go.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely there's different types of backend storage systems. So the access mode that you kind of mention now is the read write many, right? So you could run something. You can run, if you run Ceph on Kubernetes, for instance, right? That is a distributed file system, and that will be able to access the file system from anywhere in the cluster, right? So there is an attach and a detach kind of phase, but the data is always available on the node, right? It's just if a pod kind of gets scheduled on that node, it just mounts it, right? And it's a very quick process. So you don't have to because the appliances that I work with, they're SAN based, right? And to be able to have a SAN volume presented to multiple nodes at one time, that means that you need to have a clustered file system that coordinates the locks and stuff like that, right? And it gets really complicated really quickly. But in most cases, like Kubernetes was kind of built to run shared nothing distributed applications, right? Yeah. And normally, like if you say that you're running a Postgres or an etcd database or a Redis store or something like that, you usually have data replicated to multiple nodes at the same time. And when you have that data replicated to multiple nodes, it's just like one node can go down and its storage can go down. It doesn't really matter, right? It will still, the application will still be available, right? And those are some of the core principles of designing applications to run on Kubernetes. But we deal with a lot of legacy applications that require like SAN type storage, and where you just run a single replica of the application within Kubernetes, and that needs to kind of be orchestrated very carefully on how it gets rescheduled on Kubernetes.
Yeah.
So there's a little detail within your persistent storage system that is called a volume attachment, and it's basically an API resource in Kubernetes, and that volume attachment basically keep tracks of where the volume is mounted. And if it's a read-write once volume, you won't be able to attach that to another node until that volume attachment has been released, right? So that kind of prevents, that is like the soft version of a split brain kind of protection mechanism, so to speak, right? And storage vendors such as ourselves, we've implemented our own kind of split brain protection thing to prevent multiple nodes. Because, I mean, a node can be partitioned, right, in a network outage or whatnot, and lose all track of everything, right? But we have, as long as we can communicate with the storage device, we have means of severing all the connections to those particular volumes. And writes that are in flight will obviously be complicated to recover, but we haven't had any data outage so far. So,
well, I guess that's one of those things that you learn with time, right? Is how much control do I put into the Kubernetes, and how much control do I offload and abstract to let the storage vendors do what they do best, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a balance there, and we have our own kind of constructs to kind of deal with it because we don't want customers to run into trouble, right? So, but there are multiple improvements coming in the CSI specification to prevent these disasters from happening as well. So there's a lot of work going into this because people care about their data at the end of the day, right? That's how simple it is. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So the CSI driver, I'm guessing, once that came into play, that probably kind of took the handcuffs off of the Kubernetes project as far as like waiting for other vendors to develop integrations every release and certify everything. All the onus got pushed back out instead.
Yes. Yeah, so there's still a migration process actually happening from the in-tree drivers
Mm.
to be rewritten as CSI drivers because all the in-tree drivers they are being deprecated essentially, so they don't want any storage drivers. There might be the odd one like the empty-dir and host path and whatnot, but any vendor specific or cloud specific driver is going out, right? So they are being developed independently and managed independently. So. And that's a
Very
huge
cool.
benefit for both for end users and the core Kubernetes project and the vendors.
Hmm. Yeah, very cool. And I'll have one more question here. I think we've got
Mm.
to actually park this for a part two. This has been an
Okay.
interesting conversation, and I think we could go on for a while on this and bring more knowledge to all of the listeners. But maybe one of my last questions here would be, when it comes to storage vendors, and you've talked about, okay, we've abstracted some of this, so now some of the functionality and the drivers is pushed back to the vendors. What makes the vendors different than, when you're picking from vendor A to vendor B and you're trying to figure out, okay, everybody's compatible at this point. They have a
Mm.
CSI driver that makes things work. What am I going to have to look for to figure out which storage vendor I actually need?
Yeah, so I mean, I always look at like how well is the platform abstracted into Kubernetes, right? Because you have this construct in Kubernetes that is very basic, right? So you have a storage class which works like a cookie cutter template, and then the users create persistent volume claims and they refer to the actual physical volume on the backend storage system. And the storage class, which is the cookie cutter template, is just how much can the Kubernetes administrator customize in that storage class to provision storage to their users that cater to the actual needs, right? So in the storage class, that's where you would define if you want to have dedupe turned on or turned off, if you want to set QoS policies and such. That will all come from the storage class, right? And if you do your laundry list of features that the array has, and it's just like, does that match what you can put in the storage class? Can I use all these advanced features that the array actually provides in the Kubernetes cluster? And is there a way for me as a user to actually change those values during runtime or change them like during provisioning? And there's a lot of like dynamic things that you can do in Kubernetes, right? And that's kind of where you need to look at like how well does this actually work in Kubernetes? Okay, you have a CSI driver. What will it allow me to do? Just provision a dump volume and attach it? Is that it? Is that what I paid $2 million for on this enterprise storage array, right? So that is kind of what I would look for, and that would go the same for some of the open source project out there as well. It's just like how well can you abstract all these constructs that are available on the array. And we haven't even touched on, I went through half of my list of topics we could talk about, right? And that is the data management aspect of it. It's just, can you use volume snapshot classes on Kubernetes with the CSI driver? Will you be able to create clones from the data instantly and such, right? Can you import data from the backend array to a different cluster without disruption and such, right? So there's a ton of little small features that add a lot of value for the use cases that you're kind of tailoring towards, right? You running out, say that you run a database in production and you want the developers to have a copy of that database on a daily basis. Would you do a full backup and copy that somewhere, or would you simply just create a snapshot and clone it and let the developers work on that clone, right? And there's also an interesting aspect of it where you can replicate the data from the primary system to a downstream array and take the snapshot and clones on the downstream array and completely offload production, right? That is also a very popular pattern that we've discovered with our customers, is that their pristine production environment is just like, we don't let any developers near that. They can have a copy that is replicated a few hours ago. That's fine, right? And that is sort of when you're really nimble and agile with your data. And in today's modernizations project, it's just like the data is the new oil, right? That sounds like a bit of a cliche, but I mean, they want to be able to make it available to as many people as possible. And that comes with a cost, both from a security standpoint and data governance. And then you have the capacity of it and how many copies do you need and such, right? So there's a lot of different angles to it.
You're muted, Bu.
Bu.
I said Bu. I meant Boo.
Yeah, here I am. Yeah, that'll be interesting to talk to in that I think many folks would probably, although a lot of our audience is NetOps folks, probably a lot of folks that are just general systems administrators as well, who are coming from a VMware or that type of hypervisor background, who are used to having some of the features that you talked about in the VMware sense, and maybe kind of converting that knowledge into how does this actually work now with containers. That'll be a cool discussion. So I would love to, I'm putting you on the spot here, but I'd love to book a time. We'll do a part 2 of this and go over all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're done with that, it's probably going to be a part 3, because there is like, this is like a can of worms, right? There's always new topics to talk about and go deep into use cases and talk about all the different features. But I'm available to you anytime. This is fun.
That'll be cool.
That's great. I would love to talk about data design too, because like I said, monolithic architectures, 2004, and standard replication streams and all that. That's where I left storage, and I know that there's probably been tremendous leaps forward in capability since then.
Absolutely, you'd be surprised how much of that is still around, though. I'm telling you.
Yeah,
doesn't change.
Well, it's hard. It's hard to make that shift in paradigm, right? From this is how I've always done it. Even though I have this new technology, I'm going to kind of try to put that square peg in the round hole and force it in. So
yeah.
Awesome. So Michael, just for folks who are listening right now and watching right now, I know your Twitter handle is actually below your name. So for folks who are watching right now can see that, but maybe for the listeners, you can just go over where people might find you. We do have a show thread on community.f5.com, but for folks who might not visit that, where can they find you? What kind of resources do you have kind of freely out there?
Yeah, so I'm mainly on Twitter, on LinkedIn. You can find me, Michael Mattsson, just as my name is spelled there. You will also be able to find me on the HP Developer Slack channel. It's a public Slack. If you just go to developer.hp.com, you will find it there somewhere on how to sign up and log in and such. And I'm always available for questions and explaining things that kind of seem out of place in the storage world in Kubernetes, so to speak. I'm also on the CNCF Slack and such as well. So same name and such. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Michael, you're a wealth of information when it comes to Kubernetes storage. So this is awesome. Great to have you on. And we look forward to booking a part 2 with you.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate the conversation.
I'll bring you backstage here. Jason, that was a good time, hey?
Awesome. Yeah. I look forward to digging into that more, because it's like I had a storage world way back in the day when I worked for the DoD here in the United States. And, we had some enclaves all around the world, and we had to replicate storage in between them all because we randomized where everybody went on the front end. And so the back end had to be ready to serve those workloads within 5 minutes. And so, replicating data and where writes are going. And, of course, you could read anywhere and all that stuff. So, I do have a little bit of experience and exposure, but it's been a long time. So I'm curious where the industry's gone on that front.
It'll be great to have Michael catch us both up on that kind of stuff. So that'll be cool. So as we close here, I just want to remind folks, if you're watching us right now live, you might be watching us from LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter. Please hit subscribe, follow, whatever it is on that platform, hit like. Leave a comment as well. If you're watching this afterwards, feel free to leave comments on these things. You can even ask questions. And if you haven't connected with Michael directly, we can get them over to Michael or show Michael what the questions are. And if you're listening to this right now, you may have found us on Apple, Google, or Spotify podcasts. So make sure you're hitting subscribe or follow on that. Leave us a 5-star review if you can. That helps us out greatly. And all the notes that we might have for this are going to be found on community.f5.com. Within the groups, you'll find a DevCentral Connects group, and there will be a show thread that has all the information to be found on there. So otherwise, on behalf of myself and for Jason, this has been DevCentral Connecting with y'all. Bye for now. Well, thanks for checking out that video. If you have any questions, leave a comment down below. While you're down there, hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. You might want to check out one of these videos over here. And if you haven't already, go check out community.f5.com. This is where all the DevCentral Connects hosts hang out, as well as the rest of the community. It's free to sign up, and we'll see you there.